Welcome to FO Podcasts. With me is Nadia Oweidat. She is a professor at Kansas State University. She's an intellectual historian, which means she's a historian of ideas. She's a bright cookie. At the moment, she's seconded to the U.S. State Department. However, let this be very clear that she's speaking right now in an individual capacity. She's not speaking for the State Department and definitely not for her Uncle Sam. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you for having me, Atul.
Brilliant. So, Nadia, you are coming out with your first book. You are known in our Oxford circles as a bright upcoming historian, and your book has a fantastic title. It's called Reform and Its Perils in Contemporary Islam. So tell us, what is your book all about?
My book takes on a really important question. Why isn't there more reform in the Muslim world? So I wanted to address the question of what are the challenges of reforming Islamic thought? So my book is a case study about one of the foremost scholars in reforming Islamic thought and the challenges he faced in reforming Islam.
Your book, and it says on the cover itself, is about a brilliant Islamic philosopher, Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd. And you talk about the challenges reformers face, not just in terms of ideas, but also in terms of political and social ecosystems they operate in. So, question I have for you is why Abu Zayd, and why did you, Nadia, as a person, as a human being, as a scholar, pick him in particular?
So the choice for Abu Zayd took place in a context where basically, I took a class at Oxford by Professor Ron Nettler on reformist in Islamic thought, and I got to see and discover, because I didn't discover that in the Middle East for sure, that there are a lot of brilliant scholars and philosophers who contributed massively to this debate. But because of the information environment in the Arabic-speaking world, most of them, if not all, are authoritarian. So there's not a free debate of ideas. There's not a free expression of thought. So I didn't know about these philosophers until I literally got to basically the U.S. and then England. So as I was very intrigued by these reformers, I wanted to focus on one or several of them, and I started delving into the work of many of them. And I kept hearing from fellow, friends, scholars, but don't pick Abu Zayd. He is so difficult. Abu Zayd contributed to Islamic thought in very original ways in which other scholars have not. So a lot of people wanted to basically say, pick somebody easy, pick somebody who's just basically would be a lot easier to handle as somebody who broke new grounds, and especially that there isn't a single book about him in English. So my book is the very first one. And I was intrigued, and as I read Abu Zayd's works, I really was inspired by him because his vision of what Islam is, whether it's true or not, but his vision is so beautiful. It is, for him, Islam means liberal, democratic norms. Islam means universal human rights. Islam means personal rights to a level that you would enjoy in liberal democratic countries. So, it's a vision that tickled me as somebody who loves these norms, who chose as an adult to immigrate, to live under these laws. So he really inspired me because he believed so much in this vision of Islam. And I basically started to critique, to see really, my book is an attempt to see, has he achieved that? And in the ways he fell short, why was that?
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that Abu Zayd went further than any scholar in modern Islamic thought in the pursuit of liberal democratic values. And tell us a bit more about this chap. Apparently, he was a pious Muslim. Apparently, he grew up in Egypt. So tell us more, give us more color about this individual?
Yeah, Abu Zayd is a really fascinating scholar. So he grew up in the countryside in Egypt, where to a very poor family. And the economic situation of his family put pressure on him. I think he's always had a scholarly bent, even as a young person. He loved to read, was very curious. But his family pressured him to basically pick a course where he gets practical training instead of scholarly training so that he can support his family quickly. So he went to an Islamic kuttab, like Islamic school, where he memorized the Quran by heart by the age of 8. And
That's pretty early.
It is pretty early. He was, judging from where he ended up, he clearly was always a brilliant person, even though the environment wasn't always, supportive of his brilliance. He even also temporarily went to a Christian school because there was not another school in the village where he was. There were a lot of Copts before he went into vocational training and became a telecommunication civil servant, if you would. But his dream of contributing to Islamic thought, because he saw, like I did, I think this is why I saw some part of me in him, like he saw how much Islam and political Islam and different interpretations of ideas about Islam shaped his life. And for him, he saw how whoever comes to power had a different version, and that becomes the version that is certain. And if you go outside these colors, you are persecuted, you are punished, you are jailed, etc. So for Abu Zayd, the dream never died. So even when he was working in telecommunication, he continued to take nightly classes until he finished his undergraduate. Then he joined a graduate degree in University of Cairo, and he also did his PhD there. He was an excellent student. He passed basically with extension. And because he was such an exceptional student, the department chose him to stay in the department and teach Islamic thought. And he was a little bit hesitant when he was picking his focus of his PhD, because in his University of Cairo, the university has had a lot of trouble with people who were pushing the envelope. Abu Zayd's intellectual lineage, if you would, and I go into that in details in the book. I go back to, the first scholars who basically encountered modernity for the first time, and then, with the Brits, with the British and the French, who were basically championing these ideas, and how these ideas were imported to the Arab Muslim Middle East, and the scholars who believed, like Abu Zayd, that there could be an interpretation that combines Western values with traditional Islam. So these were the scholars that Abu Zayd looked up to, but each one of them was basically punished, was in some way persecuted. So he was afraid to follow in their footsteps because he was afraid he would meet the same fate. And sure enough, he would meet the same fate later. But, still he persisted, and he really believed, he had such an intellectual honesty about him. Like, he believed that these scholars who back down should not have backed down. They should have stuck to their guns, if you would, the way he did. He truly lived by example in sticking to his own, intellectual honesty, if you would, and the pursuit of truth, no matter where it leads.
And he ended up in jail in Egypt.
No, he did not end up in jail. But what happened is, when he filed to get a promotion at his university, his books that he has written were given to a committee. And one member in the committee, just one member, was an Islamist, essentially. And he was also a preacher at a mosque. And he used that platform as a preacher to basically decide that Abu Zayd is an apostate. He's not a real Muslim, and therefore Muslims should kill him because he's not a real Muslim. Mind you, we know too many stories of just whatever cleric saying, oh, this person is not a Muslim, and there's a fanatic somewhere who has never read these intellectuals' books who would attack these intellectuals. That is sadly too common a story that the latest, maybe you might have heard about what happened to Salman Rushdie. But, in the Middle East, there's a lot of examples, sadly, of people being attacked by extremists who have never read them. So this person on the committee, and it's such a shame that he was in the committee of a university who would use his basically position as a preacher, as an imam in a mosque, to basically say Abu Zayd is an apostate and he should not be at a university. And people who were listening to that sermon basically filed a lawsuit to deem Abu Zayd an apostate. So the laws in Egypt, like the laws in many countries in the Middle East, are an amalgamation of old and new, Sharia and new laws. And they don't always sit well together because, some laws are based on universal human rights, modern laws, citizenship, etc. And some laws are based on Sharia, the very medieval, the very, that don't sit well in modern norms of human rights. So Islamists use a specific law that was in the books in Egypt at the time in the mid-90s called Hisba law. And essentially, because Abu Zayd has written so vervously against authoritarianism, specifically religious authoritarianism, he was sacrificed, essentially. The courts, and it's telling of the environment in which Abu Zayd existed. It's telling of the conditions in Egypt that the courts sided with his adversaries that he is an apostate. And because he is an apostate and he's no longer a Muslim man, his wife is divorced by him because she's a Muslim woman and no Muslim woman can be allowed to marry a non-Muslim. And if you're an apostate, you're basically walking around with a target on your head. So he luckily escaped to the Netherlands, where he would live and thrive intellectually, actually, and be able to teach and mentor, students from all around the world, including from the Muslim world, from Indonesia, from all around the world, in addition to Western students. So luckily for him, the Netherlands took him in and we got to enjoy more of his intellectual production.
So you mentioned modernism. So what is the modernist version of Islam? And what was Abu Zayd's grievance with political Islam? And whilst you're doing that, I guess you should tell our listeners what is political Islam as well.
All right. So Abu Zayd, again, identified as a pious Muslim, and he made a huge distinction between being Muslim and being an Islamist. An Islamist is somebody with a political vision of Islam. He basically wants to impose his own vision interpretation on others, whether they want to or not. So he made that distinction. That distinction was so vital for Abu Zayd. In fact, if I am to say, what is the number one distinction between modernists and all others, because reforming Islam is a big topic, and many want to reform Islam from within who don't, have the label of modernist, so there's an array of views.
But the Deobandis, which is a town in my state of Uttar Pradesh, the Deoband school also began at the end of the Mughal, after the collapse of the Mughal Empire and the failure of the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857 to reform Islam. And in fact, the Taliban follows the Deoband school. So indeed, you're right. Reformists come in all shapes and sizes. So,
absolutely. So what distinguishes Abu Zayd and his intellectual class is that they believed very strongly in an institutional separation between Islam and the state. They basically believed that the state has no business imposing religion on people.
That's a very modern idea.
A very modern idea. And he believed this is how you protect Islam from becoming something imposed on people, and people hate religion because for them, the state becomes a representation of the faith and it muddies the water. It makes people, unfairly perhaps blame Islam for things that Islam is, not to be blamed for. So he believed that the state should not be in the business of imposing Islam on people. He believed that religion, Islam included, should be a very personal matter. he also spoke strongly, and this is very modern and very Western, honestly, idea that religion, faith, should be a personal matter. Even the group should not be imposing religion on individuals. That's, that individualistic view of freedom of faith is very modern. Most of the Muslim world, especially the Arab world, does not have that vision of, personal freedoms of conscience. That is very much. But Abu Zayd believed that is real Islam. He believed that faith should be something personal, and it was absurd to him that you are free until you decide to be a Muslim. But once you decide you're a Muslim, you lose that freedom forever, and you're not allowed to ever change again. And you're born into it or locked into it once you decide to be Muslim, and that's it. Then it's too late for you to exercise your freedom again. So he believed that political Islam is a recipe for disaster for the Middle East, for the Arab world, for Muslims. So for him, he truly, this is a critique directed at him often, that he didn't distinguish between the various shades of Islamism, right, of political Islam, whether between those who are really extremist and kill fellow Muslims and those who believe in participation in politics. There's massive diversity between these two extremes.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan is said to be someone who believes in political Islam, someone who is inspired by the Ottoman Caliphate. And on the other hand, you get very, very radical people, such as the Taliban, ruling Afghanistan, who are also an example of political Islam. So what is political Islam as per Abu Zayd?
Abu Zayd believed that what distinguishes people like Erdogan from Taliban is not the kind or type, if you would, but the degree. That they're only separated by degrees, but they all have 5 things in common. And these are, number 1, is that they basically create no distance between Islamic thought and religion or spirituality itself. So they make them one and the same. And to him, there should be a separation between faith, what people believe, and the thought, which should be, people should be able to tackle it, to analyze it, to critique it. He also believed, number 2, that Islamists see everything through one prism, which is, religion. Again, Abu Zayd believed there are different sciences, there are different things. You cannot lump everything under the lens of religion because that would hinder life. Life is diverse, and again, he believed in institutional separation. The third thing that unites all Islamists is this romanticization of the past, seeing, again, the caliphate without ever, in fact, truly delving into what was the caliphate like for most people. Is it something that really met the needs of people, or did it meet the needs of, the people at top? So there's no critique allowed of the past because of the lack of freedoms of in thought and expression. But at the same time, there's an over-romanticization of that past. The fourth thing they have in common is a sense of certainty that doesn't allow any room for disagreement or debate. So a lot of these Islamists believe this is it. We own the truth, and nobody else owns the truth, and everybody else is wrong, without any room for maneuvering, without any room for debate, for disagreement. And, when a lot of these Islamists are in power, it can become very dangerous for those who are opposing certain ideas. And lastly, the lack of recognition for the development, the unfolding of history, that, we do not anymore live in 7th century Arabia, not even 7th century Egypt or 7th century, elsewhere in the world. But human history has unfolded, and that has ramifications. And the reason why this class of intellectuals that Abu Zayd represents are often referred to as modernists is because they believe in modern values. They believe that modern values are better values because they allow for more human rights, for a larger, larger segments of humanity, women, minorities, non-Muslims. So if there is a conflict between, something in Sharia and modern perceptions of human rights, the right interpretation for somebody like Abu Zayd is 100% in the camp of liberal democratic values.
Interesting. So political Islam has 5 features. You've just described them. And Abu Zayd is reconciling Islam with liberal democratic values. What version of political Islam has taken hold in the Muslim world, or especially in the Middle East, and why?
If I may just address, I'm going to get to this, what are the challenges? Why has not his version taken place in the Middle East? So his version of Islam that the world can live with very comfortably, including, I would even dare say, most Muslims, it faces 2 major challenges. One is at the level of ideas, and the other at the level of the ecosystem that you mentioned at the beginning. So at the level of ideas, if Allah is really meant to have this amazing universal human rights, and why didn't Allah just say so? If he, for example, Abu Zayd wrote a book about women and women's rights. He was very passionate advocate for women's rights and minority rights in general, and including Christian minority in Egypt. In the Quran, there's a verse that says, beat women up if you fear they may not be obedient. Not if they disobeyed. If you fear they may disobey. So
I see. So there is a verse that calls for the beating of women.
There are words, there's practices, there's historic precedent, So if Allah really meant to have this amazing equality that Abu Zayd describes, couldn't Allah just say that clearly? I mean, I honestly did not find, personally, the argument convincing that, no, you just need to interpret it right. But the rational side of me is why do I even need to interpret it? Allah is supposed to be all-powerful, all-great, all-knowing, So why did he... And, you hear people say, no, but he had to appease the people at the time. Okay, so you're telling me that the creator of the entire universe has to stoop down to the level of people, and not just, again, not the elite of the world at the time, not, people from phenomenal civilizations of thousands of years of philosophy. No. The Bedouins in Arabia, and he has to appease a certain segment of them. Why did the creator need to do that? I did not find it convincing that you, as a scholar, and I really tried, but I did not find it convincing often, the argument he makes that you just need to interpret it correctly and you will end up with universal human rights and all this. So how come we never had that in the Muslim Arab Middle East, at least? How come? But people who are Islamists or even traditionalists found his claims to be offensive. And they basically said that you are trying to make Islam into modern liberal democratic norms and not Islam. You are creating a version of Islam that is Western, that is completely far away from what we have known all our heritage. So that is one challenge that Abu Zayd and all reformers faced, is that they were accused of creating something in some ways alien, that is still new, that is still, we haven't had these norms applied in the Middle East ever yet, to the extent that he envisions. The other challenge, something does not need to be honestly factual to be believed by a lot of people, but the other challenge Abu Zayd faced is the authoritarian environment. So there's not an environment that endorses that level, that version, that is moderate, that is incredibly liberal and puts personal rights first and foremost. The authoritarian regimes of the Middle East are not secular enough to allow for aversion. They're very authoritarian. They use religion, and Abu Zayd pointed that out, that basically the reason why the legal system in Egypt persecuted him for apostasy is because he took on the political system as well for using religion for its authoritarian means. So both at the level of ideas and at the level of the eco-social system, Abu Zayd's ideas were challenged. And that makes reform in general face a really tough situation. So what is dominant in, and I focus on the Arabic-speaking Muslim world because that's my resources.
And you are from there. Indeed, you grew up there and you know the culture inside out.
I do. I did go to Islamic schools, so I know very well like that educational system.
Madrasa.
Yes. I mean, madrasa means school. So I did go to an Islamic school. I did go to Quranic memorization schools as well. And, I wanted, again, I was curious to read who else thought about this. And when I read all of these reformers, he comes from a huge class, actually, and it's such a shame and a loss to people in the region and beyond that these debates are not more translated into English, so more debate can take place. Luckily, Abu Zayd's, one of his books, got translated into English by Yale University Press, I believe, under the recommendation of Professor Andrew March, to whom I am grateful and thankful, and I'm sure many people in the scholarship.
So just to interject, Abu Zayd wrote in Arabic.
Mainly in Arabic, but when he went to the Netherlands, he started publishing in English. And there's now one book, Critique of Religious Discourse, that's the name of the book, translated from Arabic into English by Yale University Press. That came out just a few years ago. So the version that is now all over the Middle East, sadly, is the version that got a lot of investment, billions of dollars of petrodollars. It's not a tolerant version.
From Saudi Arabia, Wahhabi Islam.
I mean, many of the Gulf states contributed, and it led to a lot of intolerance all over the world. And that continues to show itself. I mean, look at the Middle East and all this militancy, extremism. It continues. The Middle East continues to suffer from that investment in that set of ideas. And a lot of people's lives, suffer because of that investment. And unless there's just as equal an investment in more tolerant liberal ideas, I don't see how that can change, honestly.
Understood. So, who speaks for Islam today? We've talked about Abu Zayd. We've talked about the preacher who tried to destroy him, called him an apostate. We've talked about political Islam and modernists. After all, the Muslim world has over 1.1 billion believers, all the way from Indonesia to believers in California. And most of them don't even speak Arabic. They don't even know the language of the Quran. So who speaks for Islam today?
Great question. So that is the first sentence in my book, Who Speaks for Islam? And truly, there are as many versions of Islam as there are Muslims. Because everybody...
So a billion plus versions of Islam.
If we are to be accurate, absolutely. Everybody has their own version, practically.
You're almost like the Hindus with their billion plus gods.
I'd say we're close. Absolutely. And, now more than ever, there's such an individualistic way to practice. Everybody has their own social media platform, their own version of what their faith, their religion is. And all the more to push for Abu Zayd's vision that religion should be officially something personal and not something a state forces on people. So in practice, there are many versions of Islam. And again, Abu Zayd believed this is why we need secularism, because there has never been a version of Islam, one single version. But even during the time of when Prophet Muhammad was alive, people didn't understand certain things and came to him, and he was the arbiter of what is Islam, what is not. As soon as he died, and there was no longer somebody who's the arbiter, immediately there was civil war that started. And there has been many wars since then to claim a version, and it has never succeeded. There has never been a single version. And I think it's a humanly an impossibility to have one version identical on all Muslims. And the more there are people who are trying to push for that, the more violence inevitably ensues.
Now, you've touched upon something very deep, because if you look at Christianity also has many forms of Christianity. In 1054, the Eastern Orthodox Church split from the Catholic Church. In 1517, you had the Protestant Reformation. And now, of course, we live in the US where there are thousands of evangelical churches. Of course, some of them don't like abortion and have a great degree of influence at the polling booth and in nominations to the Supreme Court. But hey-ho, the key point, however, is that fragmentation has been the norm even in monotheistic religions.
Absolutely. I mean, not a single one of us alive has the same fingerprint. Diversity is innate in human nature, and any attempt to annihilate that diversity is just doomed to fail. We are made diverse. And I'm really happy to see there's more and more recognition that, diversity needs to be respected and taken into consideration.
All right, so let me ask you my final question then. We've talked about your book. We've covered a lot of ground. You've been very patient with your thoughts. What is the future of Islam and the Muslim world?
The future always depends on what decisions individuals and governments and societies and communities make today. So what decisions, what ideas are being supported? What ideas are being championed? Sadly, today, we still don't see people like Abu Zayd on TV preaching a version of faith that is so inclusive. It includes everybody, including those who don't believe in it. With the competition of social media, there absolutely are more voices and diverse voices than ever before.
There are also more echo chambers than ever before, as Donald Trump has demonstrated.
Well, the future of Islam is yet to be seen.
Excellent. On that high note, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you follow this podcast, you subscribe to our newsletter on fairobserver.com, and you make sure that you go and donate $1 per year. Remember, free media cannot be free. We are not owned by billionaires or advertisers. Our whole philosophy is to provide voices from around the world. And you heard one such very powerful voice from the Arab world, Nadia Oweidat, today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Atul.